How's it going, YouTube? Coming today with another video, and today, guys, what to bring to you is cube format, better known as drafting. Draft format is my favorite because it's just so much fun and it puts your brain to the test, honestly. It's something where you have to build a coherent deck, but you also have to have like mini combos. You have to have ways to search cards. If you draft a card that's really hard to summon, maybe you have to draft a way to at least be able to summon that card, have the possibility to summon that card. And you'll see a lot of that today when we go over test builds, but the ability to go ahead and play in a format where it's no ban list and new rules, it's a ton of fun. And especially when you're playing against a lot of friends, there's just so many different ways you can go ahead and build your deck and make sure that you're going to be able to counter other strategies. And we'll talk about how you know what other strategies are going to be available in that format that you're playing for that day. And there's so many different ways you can play in draft format that we'll talk about each and every single way that you can. And I really do hope that you enjoy this video and you test this out for yourself, because cube is the best. It's honestly just so much fun, and it's something that I love the most out of Yu-Gi-Oh! So I really want to be able to share this with you so that you can go ahead and build your own and at least be able to play with a group of people and see exactly what cube format is all about. If you haven't already checked my sponsors over in Imperium Duelist and Dragon Shield, definitely go ahead and check them out down in the description below. And without further ado, let's check out draft format, because this is a ton of fun. Now for some rules. The ban list doesn't apply, which is pretty crazy, I know, but at the same point, there's certain cards that are just not fair in cube, and these are things that definitely have to get banned. So we're making our own custom ban list, and this is something where we already banned Mystic Mine. We're gonna be banning Phoenix Blade, and it's just gonna be an ever-growing list. So definitely let me know down in the comments below if you want to see this list. Maybe I'll make a Google Doc and link it in the description below so you guys always have an idea of what the ban list looks like. But everything's a one of in this as well, which is pretty crazy, because if you think about deck building, there's a lot of things you have to make go right when everything's a one of. But at the same point, we play all types, which means that every single monster fulfills every single type. So at that point, you can go Rhoda for any monster, which is pretty crazy at that point, because you can also Lone Fire for anything, you can Rescue Cat for anything. So it's pretty wild as to what you can do. You can E-Tell you for Graph. So there's a lot of really cool options that you have in this type of format, and that's where your deck building really has to reflect that. You'll see in my choices too, in my first build versus my second build, you'll see that my second build is objectively better than my first build, because it's been a very long time since I've done cube format. So where I went from my first to my second draft is going to be vastly different, and we'll talk about what I was going for on each separate draft. And then all cards are pre-errate, which is pretty insane. So if you have even like DMOC, it definitely works like pre-DMOC, which is pretty insane. But just to kind of backtrack a little bit too, you can play all attributes, all names. All names means like if you reborn like the Ogdoadic card and then it says search an Ogdoadic spell or trap, that just means search any spell or trap, which is pretty nuts. So you want to make sure that if you are doing that, that you have at least some kind of balance around that, because that gets pretty broken pretty fast. I prefer all types. I think that it's the most balanced way to do it, and it also helps with deck building quite a lot, because you'll see even in my builds, it was really needed to have all types in there for sure. So for the next set of rules here, the first pack that you receive will have a set number depending on how many players are in the cube. So let's say that you're playing with 8 people, that very first pack that you receive will be 20 cards. Now the rest of the pile that I'll show here in a little bit will just be pushed off to the side, and then everyone will have their 20 card pack in their hand. If you have 8 people at the table, then 8 people will have their own 20 card pack. You'll look at the pack and you'll take one card out of it, and then you'll pass the entire rest of the pack to the person to your left. And then you'll keep going until that first pack that everyone had is completely zeroed out and everyone has their cards from each pack that was passed around. And so now you'll go back to the original stack of packs, you'll grab the second pack, and then you'll pass it to the right this time. And you'll keep going around the table until everyone's pack is gone. And then you'll grab the last third pack, and then you'll pass that to the left around the table until it's completely gone. You reveal the first card drafted from each pack as well. That's really cool too, because you leave it face up on the table to give everyone a really solid idea of what the metagame is going to be like and how they're going to be able to counter that strategy, what they need to draft to make sure that they're successful, and what their opponents are going to be drafting, which is very important, because if you have a strategy on your own, you got to make sure that you're prioritizing certain draft picks, especially if someone right next to you is drafting something very similar. They're going to be drafting the same cards as you, so you want to make sure that you grab them first and you prioritize which cards are very important to your strategy. So you also want to make sure that you have your extra deck planned out as well, because at the end of your extra deck you will have 20 cards and you will need to get rid of 5 of them. So your extra deck will be going down to 15 cards like normal. At the end of your main deck draft, you will have the remaining 10 cards become your sideboard, which is also very important because then you will have extra cards to be able to counter different strategies, but your main deck will also be thinned out. The way that this works is that by the end of one of those packs going around the table is that you're going to be just throwing cards that you don't really want in your deck. But this is the opportunity here at the end of the draft to be able to get rid of those 10 cards and make your deck really consistent, and you only have the cards that you really wanted from the draft in it. Sometimes you get stuck with 1 or 2 of those, and I'll show you what you do if that ever becomes a problem in my second build here that I'll show you, because that was something that did happen, but I did make it work. So the next thing I want to talk about is what does a pack look like? And so this is what I meant by whenever you have a pack of cards. If you're playing with 8 players, usually you'll have 20 cards in the extra deck, 20 cards in the first pack of the main deck, 20 cards in the second pack, and then 15 as the last pack. So this is really cool too, because again, you draft your extra first, so you build around your extra deck and you have a really good idea and some kind of win con. Make sure that you draft a win con, because I know for a while I was talking about like, wow, I don't have a win con, and then I drafted one card and I was like, hey, I have a win con. So it's just one of those things where you want to make sure that you're drafting a coherent list and you're making sure that you have a really nice strategy, some kind of combo, and then ways to search or summon pieces to that combo. So I think that this is really cool because again, this is just like 4 packs of cards you pass on the table. It can take anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours to draft. So make sure that you have a lot of time put aside, because once you get started, you're not going to want to stop playing. So let's look at an example pack. So this is really important because if you look at cards like Rescue Cat and all types, it's pretty insane, right? You can summon whatever you want out of the deck, but you really want to make sure that you are looking at your strategy as a whole. So maybe you even want a card like Level Eater, because Level Eater is absolutely insane. There's a reason why it's banned. So these are other cards in the cube and in the draft that you might want to take over the Rescue Cat. Even looking at the Ogdoadic being a free Foolish Burial for any light monster in your deck. Maybe you want to go ahead and start picking up some really powerful trap cards like Bottomless, because you want to make sure that there's a good balance between monsters and spells and traps. Or maybe you don't even know if there's any like crazy cards in this draft, because you don't get to see all the cards by the time that the cards come to you, because other people are picking out of the different packs that they get. So maybe you just want to get even like Night Beam and start having back removal. So these are things that you really got to think about whenever you're going into a cube format, because you never really know what's in the cube. So that's going to be very important. So the next thing I want to show you is going to be an example extra deck pack, and this is going to be really cool too, because you got to realize cards like Auroradon, when everything's technically a machine, kind of insane. If you draft Fortress Dragon and you draft Cyber Dragon, kind of nuts. So there's a lot of different things that you can do here, especially Hermetic Seal. That card is really insane in draft format. Dante's really good. You can grab a Garpain. Like, there's so many options that you can have in this too. So for me, I'd probably just grab Seal here, because Seal is just like one of the most broken cards in cube, but so is the Garpain. So you kind of have to pick to your strategy. But like in this pile right here, having Hermetic Seal, Guardragon, a Garpain, and Auroradon, it'd be a really tough choice as to which one you're gonna grab. So looking at example builds, this was my first draft back into drafting, because it's been a very long time, so I didn't really have a huge idea as to what was going on in the cube. So this was my best take at it. So I wanted to go with something that I was familiar with. So I drafted a lot of BAs, because I definitely know BA well. And then I drafted things like Brotar, because I know that works really well with us. And then we also have cards like the Genex Alley Bird. We also have Vanity's Fiend, the White Dragon Wyvern Burster, the Dark Flare. So I kind of went for more of like a chaos build. We have the Levianeer. So it was pretty cool. There's a lot of different ideas going on here. And then I did draft a couple Kaijus as well, because if we look at my spells and traps, I drafted the Slumber. I did have Engaged in Jamming Waves and Afterburners. Realistically, I realized that was a really bad decision once we started cubing, but at the same point, I had to do it because I had them in front of me and I saw them in my packs. But other than that, look at things like Spellbook and Knowledge. Being able to send any monster, because any monster is a spellcaster, kind of insane. And then you also have things like E-Telly to E-Telly out Graph. You also have Water Lily. This card's broken because everything in your graveyard is a reptile. I sent Graph from my deck to the grave and then Reborn Seer. And then I went Graph summon Libic made Dante detach Libic summon Genex from my hand. Just insane. So many different things that you can do. So broken. And then I had to draft things like Unending Nightmare to make sure I had those outs for Floodgates and crazy cards. Drafted Droplet. I drafted Droplet because I wanted a win con. And so my idea of a win con in this was to have things like the Borolo Dragon, because there's a lot of cards out there that struggle against Borreload, and the fact that the card itself can't be targeted. Drafting the card that was the out for this was really smart, because every single time that I summoned Borreload, it was really hard to out. And now the cube is much more updated than what it was before, so it's still relatively hard to out, but there's a lot of other options now. But it was still really smart at the time to go ahead and just draft Droplet, so I can at least summon Borreload and know that there's no Droplet out there to be able to stop it. I was lucky enough here to draft Virgil, Dante, and Beatrice, which was pretty insane. I did go ahead and draft things like Michael because I wanted to make sure that I had enough generic synchros to go into if the time came that I just needed a synchro. And then I also went into things like the Hope Harbinger. I got the Black Ship of Corn. I wanted to make sure that I just had enough generic cards here. You kind of have to have an idea going into your builds and making sure that you have some kind of win con and that the cards generically work together. So as for the next build here, this was absolutely insane. This was by far my favorite cube I've ever done. This list went undefeated and it was absolutely nuts. And we'll talk about why that is and all the different interactions that made this build so crazy. So we drafted even the Ogdotic that was a free foolish for any dark monster. I also had cards like the Sarcophagus and the Turtle, which essentially just helped me out in the battle phase. The Sarcophagus allows you to go ahead and permanently snatch steal your opponent's monster that battles over yours, which is really neat. This came up a couple times. Then also having cards like Archfiend Eccentric was so cool because you had the free MST or the free monster pop, and that came up a lot in our stun matchup that we had for game 1 and 2. Game 1, it was like an MST. Game 2, it was a pop for a Cactus Bouncer, which was really nice. Then also we had cards like Notchter, and we talked about this earlier about what happens whenever you get thrown a card that you really don't want, but it ends up in your main deck anyways. So what I did was I drafted Power Bond, and I got thrown the Chimera attack. So I was like, all right, how do I summon this? So I ended up drafting the Power Bond and the Notchter to make sure that I had a way to be able to bring it out. But at the same time, I realized that since every monster was technically also machine, you could use Notchter to reborn the Researcher, which was insane because it has 2100 defense. So that was pretty wild. Also having cards like the Miscellaneousaurus to go ahead and just banish 2 out of the grave and summon Researcher out of deck, and then Researcher can just summon whatever that's not a tuner. It was pretty wild. This draft was absolutely so much fun. Then also having cards like Shinobi Necro, the Gizmek, the Snow, Plague Spreader. This list was literally just so nuts. Also having Nibiru was crazy. Every single time this card came up, I just won. I also drafted things like Inari Fire, Nefarious, because I drafted the King of the Feral Imps. If you know anything about this card, it searches any card when it's all types. So I was able to search whatever I needed at the time, which was really nice. So the next thing I want to bring up too is Return from a Different Dimension, especially alongside Crush card, won me several games because Return from a Different Dimension with Snow is absolutely insane. So what I did was I had Akashic Magician with Firewall and Prague Leo. By the way, again, everything's pre-errata, so I did have pre-errata Firewall in my deck. So I was able to mill a lot with Akashic and be able to get to the cards that I needed. But the interaction that came up was I banished my Firewall and my Prague Leo after I used the bounce from my Snow. And then I used a Return from a Different Dimension to bring back Prague Leo and Firewall Dragon to get more bounces. It was pretty nuts. So I also had the Soul Charge, which was crazy, Tensu, which allowed me to normal summon twice. I had Fossil Dig, which allowed me to search anything I needed. And then also things like Giant Ballpark and Snake Rain. This build was nuts. So it was pretty crazy, especially with Eater Millions, to go ahead and out whatever I needed to out. This format is so much fun, and especially if you have a really successful draft, this is something where the night can go very well. And this is something where this build went absolutely crazy. So much fun. I could talk for hours. Chicken game, like, I had so much fun with this. I used Metaverse at one point when I was going to get OTK'd. After the first monster attacked, I flipped Metaverse and activated Chicken Game, so I just didn't die that turn. Went back to me, I drew a card, and then I used Chicken Game to draw again. And I think I drew Soul Charge. It was just, like, insane. Soul Charge won me at least 3 games, which was pretty nuts too. So I just want to give you a look into what this format's really like. Also, being able to draft Hulk off the bat, of course, I was like, okay, I just need to go for combo immediately. That's what I need to build for. I also had things like Black Rose, so I drafted into the Formula Synchron. I had the option to go for Shooting Riser. I probably should have picked it up, but I got Formula instead, and I really wanted to make sure they had a way to be able to Black Rose on my opponent's turn, so I went for cards like the Dark Flare Dragon to make sure I had a 5 in my deck that I could summon, and then be able to go for that play if I need to. The Dark Flare was also really insane too, because you could send a monster from your hand and essentially any monster from your deck to the grave, which is pretty crazy too. And then just overall, I had just like random cards in here too. If I needed to clear a lot, then I had like the Scarlight. I also had pre-errate Brio, which is pretty insane. Gigantic Sprite. This card came up a lot, being able to summon Sprite Red to pass my turn on, and then Sprite Red came up a lot. It was so much fun. So I do hope that you enjoyed this video, and I do hope that you at least will take a moment to look at Cube and see if you want to try it out, because Cube is one of the best ways to try out Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's one of the best ways to play if you've already been playing for a long time. Maybe you take a moment to at least try it out and give it a shot. If you haven't already checked out my Discord, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, they're all down in the description below. And if you want a coaching session over at Metafy, definitely go ahead and PM me if you have any questions, and I hope to see everyone in the next video. Thank you, everyone.